This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin. With me this week, two fantastic human beings and two spectacular, amazing comic book gods. This week, I am joined by Brian Murray.
Hello.
Paul Jasley.
Hello.
Marc Casili.
Hi.
And Dominic Archer.
Hello.
Thank you all for joining me this week. I know we don't normally have this many people on the show, but this is a huge, fantastic moment for us. We're going to be talking to Dominic and Marc about a comic that they have coming out called A Boxer later in the second half of the show. But for right now, we're going to do the thing that we do every single week, and I'm going to ask the questions that I need answered. How have you been? How have comic books been? Let's start with you, Brian.
I've been really good. I'm going to forgo Michigan Weather Watch just for the sake of expediency and get right into what I've read. This morning, I finally dug back through my backlog and read issues 5 through 12 of Life is Strange. That's the video game tie-in from Emma Viacelli, Claudia Lenardi on lines, and Andrea Izzo on colors. After months and months of buying these, I finally sat down and read them, and it was a satisfying story. I think that for people who are not a fan of the game, it might not necessarily be. But if you like me are, perhaps unhealthily obsessed with these characters, I definitely think you get your money's worth out of this book.
Gotcha. I was wondering if there was going to be a moment in that series where it eventually veered off to you have to have played the video games to really enjoy this series.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly understand the comic without reading it, but it's all about the relationships between these characters. And so if you don't have a strong investment in those relationships, I can imagine that these comics might not necessarily build that for you as well as the game did.
Very nice.
Now, Brian, what about someone who has no idea what this video game is? Could you give us the elevator pitch?
Sure. So Life is Strange is about a young woman at we'll call it an art school, who discovers that she can rewind time, and she does so by accidentally saving her best friend from being murdered in the school bathroom.
Okay.
And from there, we have some time travel, some alternate timeline type stuff. Things get messy as time travel is wont to do.
Right.
It's regular teen stuff, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, just girl stuff,
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
Well, yeah, I was wondering, like I said, how far you'd got in this series. So is this an ongoing series now? They moved from like a limited series to ongoing, or is this like the end of the run?
So this is the end of the current series with issue 12, but there is going to be another, I think it's called Life is Strange Partners in Time, which is a joke from the game, comes out in April, I think. Okay. Very cool. Well, Paul, what about you? How have you been? How have comic books been? I promise, Marc, Dominic, we're going to get to you guys. We got to get through this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm very impatient.
I'll make it quick. Things are good on my end. Nothing really to report personally, but I did manage to read a bunch of comics over this weekend, which is pretty nice. I finally read Dial H for Hero Volume 1, Into the Heroverse. This collects the first 6 issues of the recent Dial H for Hero series. I had bought the first issue of this back when it came out last year, and I think I even talked about it on the show, how much I enjoyed it. As it is, I forgot to put it on my pull list, so I fell way behind and eventually had to basically catch up by grabbing the digital collection. And I kind of feel bad I wasn't buying it month to month because it's a really fucking good comic. If you're familiar with the Dial H concept, the idea is that it's a magical sort of rotary phone dial, and if you dial hero on it, you turn into a superhero for an hour. It's a random superhero, and this series follows a teenager named Miguel Montez who finds the H dial, and is being chased through the Heroverse by the former owner of the H dial who wants it back. What's great about it is like the idea of becoming a superhero. They make all these imaginary superheroes up, but they're all clearly references to other characters. And the art by Joe Quijones, he manages to mimic the art styles of the different series that these characters are from, right? So in the first issue, he turns into a monster truck-based superhero, but it's drawn like a Rob Liefeld character, right?
Wait, so there's pouches everywhere on a car? Is that what I'm
exactly.
hearing?
Yeah. And then, then later on in the series, No feet ever, just wheels, right? They're easier to draw. And the later in the series, his friend that he's sort of traveling with, Summer, she turns into a Mike Allred-inspired sort of madman type character. There's a brief interlude where Miguel shows up in a Daniel Klaus-looking comic for no reason. Not really superhero, just shows up in a book that looks like Daniel Klaus. So there's so many little visual, little Easter eggs and things that make it a really fun read. And it's one of those things that I read it digitally, and as soon as I was done, I'm going to buy this physically when it comes out in a nice big collection, because it's going to be fun to go back and look at all these pages, and see all that stuff. So I was surprised how much I enjoyed it.
Very cool. So this is the same artist on the whole run?
Mm-hmm.
That is impressive.
Yeah, it's like I said, Joe Quijones, Jordan Gibson on colors. There is an inker who helps out on some of that stuff, and I'm blanking on their name. I forgot to grab it, but...
sorry, Mark. We're really sorry about that.
Right. No, but it's a really fun series, and you don't even really have to know that much about the H-Dial and Dial H for Hero as a historical concept. It's one of my favorite sort of wacky DC concepts, so to have it done this way again is really fun. So
very cool.
Yeah. I also briefly want to mention I finally read the first volume of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen about 20 years late, So it's one of those books that's always been on my to-read list. I finally was able to read it thanks to the miracle of Hoopla, the digital library service there. So I really like this type of Alan Moore story. I know there's a ton of literary allusions I'm missing out on, but cutting out all the sort of metatextual complexity and just making a fun team-up story, I really appreciated that. And Kevin O'Neill's art is fantastic. It's a really beautiful looking book. I'm excited to go back and read the rest of it after finishing this first volume. So
somewhere out in the universe, Nick White's ears are burning right now, and
right.
He wants to have a conversation with you about this.
I bet,
well, very cool. Well, finally, let's move on. Let's talk to our very special guests. We had to talk about comics really quick, but now let's quickly talk to you, Marc and Dominic. Could you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves? I guess, Marc, let's start with you. How have you been? How have comic books been? What have you been reading? And could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm here in Brazil right now, which is where I'm from, and I worked in film for a while, but comics were always my first passion. And at some point, I just decided to go for it and started really working on comics, so writing and drawing my own comics. And at one point, I was living in Amsterdam, and I was looking for a place to continue studying comics. So I went to the University of Dundee in Scotland, which is where I met Dom. And there they have a great master's program in comics, which is what both of us did. And then we became friends and started making comics together. And I also do my own stuff, which is more personal, create our own stuff. So I've been back here for 2 years, and I'm putting out some comics that are only in Portuguese right now. Mm-hmm. But I do plan on translating them to English and bringing them abroad in the near future. And I've been trying to read everything. I try to keep up with things that are coming out in the States. But also I've been reading a lot of Brazilian comics because we have a really strong scene. So most of the comics I've been reading right now are Brazilian, but I have been reading. So the latest one I picked up was My Favorite Thing is Monsters.
Mm. Nice.
Which was released by Fantagraphics, I think 2 years ago, and came out last year here. And I'm really enjoying it. And as far as the monthly comics, I really like X-Men and like the current run. And Jimmy Olsen, you were talking about like DC wacky stuff, and that's just the ticket. I love both of the creators in that book, and it's a fantastic book.
Yeah, that's a really fun book.
Yeah, I've been meaning to. I picked up all the single issues, but I haven't read it, so maybe this is a kick in the pants to actually sit down and do it and read those books. Very cool.
That's my favorite Batman so far. Like of the recent 10 years, I think his Batman is my favorite.
Yeah, interesting.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
very cool. And Dominic, what about you? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've been reading, how you've been, what it's like, where you're living, all that stuff. We do weather watches on this show, whatever you're into.
Well, you guys are in for some real bad luck, because I live in Moscow. And, and let me tell you, it's really not great. But then I think you said you guys are from Michigan, so maybe we're not. You know, we're not far off. Probably
not too different.
Yeah. I'm from the UK. I used to be a teacher in China and Hong Kong and Turkey, and now I live in Russia. And as Mark said, we did the master's degree in comics and graphic novels together. And really, the only reason that I teach is because comic books are pretty expensive to make. And teaching is a good way of earning the money to make books. So, and, you know, you get to freeze your balls off in Russia. So, you know, it all kind of works out. But at the moment, as Mark was saying, I've been really enjoying the Jonathan Hickman's X-Men run. I haven't enjoyed so many of the tie-ins. I find Excalibur to be personally quite insulting because it's just the Captain. If it's not Alan Moore writing Captain Britain, I find it very difficult to get it. And now that they yesterday or 2 days ago they announced this team, the Union, which is like the new British Avengers team out of Marvel. And Scottish people, let me tell you, Scottish people were not happy with this announcement.
Really?
I don't know if you saw, I don't know how much you saw on Twitter, but it's like every Scottish comics creator I know is like, I can't believe you call it the Union. We're having another referendum. We're going to be leaving the Union. We don't want to be on your superhero team.
I see.
Yeah. So, As a Scottish independence man, Mark is following them all the way. But it's difficult. It's a difficult situation because you're not creating a post-Brexit superhero series and not making it about like what it means to be a part of that union, right? So like there's going to be critique in it. It's just having the patience to read it. You would hope. But what I've been reading at the moment the most is The Darkness, the original run of The Darkness by Garth Ennis and Marc Silvestri from like the mid 90s. Because at the moment, Top Cow, the IDW imprint, the Image imprint, they have every year I think they do a writing competition for new talent, that kind of stuff. And the writing talent is write a one-shot issue of The Darkness. And he's not a character that I'm that familiar with, and so they have like a bunch of recommended reading, so I've been checking that out and thinking, can I write this? And after reading about 2 years worth, I've decided, yes, I think I probably can. Nice. It's really weird to read because Garth Ennis and Marc Silvestri are both just like some of the defining creators of like the last 20 years. But the early books suck, and Marc Silvestri's art sucks. And I'm looking at it like, what is this? I don't. So that's actually been really interesting for me to see this work by great creators that I'm reading going, actually, these guys weren't, not everything they did was a home run. So that's been interesting.
Interesting. Wowzer. Well, all of our Marc Silvestri fans out there, they're gonna be real mad about this episode. I just want you to know.
It's great. He's great. He's great. It's just that this work in particular was just, they're like panels that are clearly in the wrong place, and it's just like the way that the pages are structured. It doesn't feel like an expert who's on the top of his game. It kind of feels like, he's got talent, and that Marc Silvestri, he'll get there, right? He'll get there one day,
Gotcha.
It's funny because I love Marc Silvestri's art, but I don't think it's ever been as good as his original run on the X-Men, which I think is fantastic.
It's funny. I'm a huge X-Men fan. I just I have a gap of so much knowledge from like that era of X-Men, which everyone that I think they hear, they gasp and they fall over because they can't believe it. But you see, this is more of it. Now I got to try more of this stuff because this is what happens on the show. People come on, they tell me about stuff. I'm like, okay, well, screw all my new comics. I got to read all this backlog stuff. So I appreciate the suggestions. But I did actually, for me, I mean, I've been busy nonstop trying to make this show work. But on top of that, I did have time to sit down and read some comics, and I picked this up on a whim. I think Lonnie Nadler tweeted about it. It's his new book that just came out from Animosity, not Animosity. That's same Aftershock. Everything starts with an A. Aftershock Comics. This is Undone by Blood #1, or Undone by Blood, or The Shadow of a Wanted Man #1. Zach Thompson and Lonnie Nadler with art by Sammy Cavella, colors by Jason Wordie. Sammy Cavella, you may recognize the name. They did work on Abbott, the book that Saladin Ahmed did. Fantastic series. I love the art in that series. I did not think that Cavella could do better than that they did in Abbott, and here we are with Undone by Blood #1. Basically, the story is our protagonist, Ethel, finds herself in her hometown of Sweetheart, Arizona, on a mission to find the man who murdered her family. It's a simple premise. It feels like a Western because it's just a Western. The thing that sold me on this book was, I think Lonnie Nadler, he had tweeted, I've got this new book out. It's just a Western. It's not a Western with zombies. It's not a Western in a different time space. It's not a Western with a twist. It's not a Western in space. It's just a Western. And I'm all for that. I watched The Mandalorian, and I decided this is all I want. Westerns. Just give me a Western. Yes. I'm going to be 56 years old recreating like some boomer's lifestyle where all they do is sit down and watch Western movies all day, because for some reason that connects in my head. I just love it. And really, this issue was just a straight old Western. Ethel, she finds herself in this town. She meets all the weird yokels. She's got this tarnished history. It feels like when the lone cowboy comes to town and they've got revenge on their mind. It's fantastic. Cavella's art was amazing. I think the most interesting part of this story was the way that Cavella was able to work with Wordie to switch between the two stories that are happening in the series. As Ethel is traveling throughout the city, she's also reading this book that's called The Shadow of a Wanted Man. And so we switch between present day and that book. And the art style is, I don't want to say drastically different, but it is very subtly different. And like you read a whole page of this Western story and you go, whoa, this is a totally different book. It's got a totally different feel to it. And then you switch back to the present. Like it's really interesting the way they were able to do things with just subtle color changes. Because I don't think Cavella tried to draw things any differently. It's just like washing of pages of different colors, and like the way they choose to highlight some colors over others depending on if you're in the book or out of the book. I was really impressed with this series overall, so I finished the #1, hit subscribe on Comixology, and I'm all for reading this Western stuff because apparently that's my thing now. I'm loving it. But anyways, let's talk about comic books that are coming out this upcoming week or in the near future, because comic books are dropping on February 19th, 2020. What are you guys excited for this week? I'm going to pitch it back over to you, Brian.
Sure. So I'm looking forward to, and this is going to be a weird one for followers of the show, because it's a DC book.
Whoa. Brian, you? DC?
I know. We've got DCeased Unkillables #1 coming out. This is the same writer, Tom Taylor, with Carl Mostert and Trevor Scott doing art. And I had a surprising amount of fun with the DCeased arc, especially because it did what DC almost never does, which is tell a story where you don't need to have read 35 years of back issues to understand who the hell these people are and what they're doing. I went in pretty much knowing that, Darkseid is a bad guy, and that was enough groundwork to get me through this book. So what Unkillables is doing is kind of telling another story in that same sequence of events. This time, instead of focusing on, Superman and Mr. Miracle and all them, we're focusing on some of the more street-level villains. So it's like Deathstroke and Red Hood and their team as they attempt to survive, I guess, through the DCeased events.
Well, as someone who's found himself completely out of the DC loop, over the, more so than usual, could you tell me about what DCeased really is? Because all I know is that it's the zombie series or something. Is that what's going on with that series?
Yeah, so it's basically Darkseid gets his hands on Cyborg and manages to, he thinks, reconstruct the anti-life equation. And what he winds up with is actually sort of a fucked up, corrupted version of the anti-life equation.
Sure.
That turns him into a zombie, and so he throws himself into a pit on his crazy fire planet. Mm-hmm. But the equation is already being broadcast, and so anybody with a screen is essentially at risk of turning into a zombie.
And nowadays, kids and their screens, they just don't get off them. Turn them off. Go outside. Play baseball, kid.
Yeah, listen to Granddad Western about that.
Yeah.
Brian, I want to say, hearing you talk about Darkseid and the Anti-Life Equation warms my heart so much, because that's very much my shit. So I really like the DCeased arc. The idea of them, DC, trying to copy the Marvel Zombies thing, I wasn't sold on until I realized they were tying it into Darkseid, the Anti-Life Equation, and that hooked me, and I ended up really liking that series. So I'm looking forward to this one as well.
Very cool. Well, Paul, what about you? What are you excited for this upcoming week?
I'm excited for a DC book, obviously. Wonder Woman, Dead Earth #2. This is the Daniel Warren Johnson post-apocalyptic Wonder Woman story. I don't know. There's a weird trend lately where I've been really into post-apocalyptic superhero fiction, like the Batman story that Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo recently did, The Last Night on Earth. That type of stuff I'm really digging. And really the star of this book is Daniel Warren Johnson's art. Like, it's so wonderful. And this is one of the Black Label books that DC's doing where it's oversized. It's like a magazine-sized comic, which I know is annoying because you can't fit it into your long box. But this is this story and this artwork deserves that size page. Like, it's one of the few examples of that format where I think, yeah, it needs to be this big, for a reason, because Warren's sort of artwork, there's certain like pages or double page spreads where he just will it's so evocative of that mood of this post-apocalyptic wasteland, and the action sequences. I mean, if you've read any of his other work, like Murder Falcon, you know what you're going to get with big fight sequences with his artwork. So he's really become one of my favorite artists in the past few months. So seeing him do a big 2-book Wonder Woman like this is pretty amazing for him. So I'm excited to see this book.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I read #1. It floored me. I was blown away. I love it. Well, Dominic, Marc, you guys have any books that you're excited for that are coming out in the near future?
I do know about one comic that's coming out this week that I'll probably pick up, which is the new issue of Daredevil, because I'm enjoying Chip Zdarsky's run so far. The art is going to be Jorge Fornes, and I love his art. It reminds me a lot of David Mazzucchelli's art, and that guy is my favorite superhero artist of all time, probably. So I love the stuff he was doing on Batman, and now he's doing a few Daredevil issues every now and then, and every time he does, I pick up those issues because they're great art, great storytelling, and I really enjoy Chip Zdarsky's writing most of the time. So it's a really solid book when they're together.
Yeah, I'm always hesitant on Zdarsky, and I don't know why. I mentioned this on our show like a couple episodes ago, but I don't know what it is about Chip Zdarsky. I just don't, for some reason, I don't ever want to try his books, and then as soon as I do, I love it. So I don't know what the hesitation is, but I always hesitate on his books.
I've heard nothing but good things about that Daredevil run, and I don't buy a lot of Marvel books, but I might have to track this one down because everyone that's read it like raves about it. So yeah,
yeah, I'd recommend it. And there's another book, I don't know when it's coming out, but it was recently announced, so maybe not for a couple months, but it's Dead Dog's Bite by Tyler Boss, who did the art on 4 Kids Walking to a Bank. And I really like his art, so I've been following him. And I don't know much about the story, but it seems to be like a mystery story, which I dig. And the art's looking really good, so I'm keeping my eye out for that.
Gotcha. I didn't know that he had a book coming out. That's exciting. Dominic, what about you? What are you excited for in the upcoming week or so?
Yeah, I'm going to kind of build off of what all you guys have been saying, because a new DCeased title is something that I'm really looking forward to.
Nice.
The last one, I sat down and read it with some friends, and we were like all watching movies and doing other stuff. And I read all of DCeased, and then passed the laptop to my friend, and he read it all. Then he passed it to the next person and read it all. And then the three of us just sat there. Why we didn't just read it together, I don't know. But that was just the way that it went. So yeah, Tom Taylor is. Well, what's really amazing about Tom Taylor is that he's not on one of the main titles, but he captures everything about the characters that you're supposed to capture, and he does it in the way that you understand, like it's an honest representation, a true representation. It's not like there's been a lot of stuff about Captain America online, like someone messing up a Captain America characterization, but Tom Taylor just like hits the nail on the head with all of the characterization. So yeah, anything he does, I'm looking forward to. Then I'm afraid I have to stab Marc a little bit in the back, now.
Oh no!
Because me and Marc have been talking for a long time about the David Mazzucchelli artist edition of Daredevil Born Again. Born Again, and we've both been wanting to get it for a long time. And then the artisan edition came out, and it was a lot more affordable because the artist edition is the big, like you guys were saying about the oversized one. It's it's all of Mazzucchelli's original pencils, and it's really expensive. Yeah, it's really expensive to get, but it's the most beautiful thing in the world. And I had a copy of it at Christmas. I ordered it on eBay, and then PayPal said, well, of course you can't do that. You're in Russia. And so you can't use PayPal in Russia. Are you crazy? So I lost it, and I spent the last 3 months fighting PayPal, like every day, emailing again and again and again, and they gave in. They broke down 2 days ago, and I got it, and it's on its way.
Hooray!
And Marc doesn't have it.
That was good when you told me about that.
Wow.
So I did promise. I said to Marc, when we win the Eisner Award for whichever book we win the Eisner Award for, I'll buy him his own copy. I'll do it. But yes, it's a ridiculous investment, but it's like the most beautiful book ever. So thanks to PayPal, I finally ordered that, and I could order the hardcover of the House of X, Power of X together.
Nice.
Yes, which I couldn't order before because it couldn't be delivered. So that's on its way now, and that's really good. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Very cool.
Nice.
Very cool. Well, for me, I am excited about a Marvel book. We're doing Marvel versus DC this week on Irie Comic Books. This is Marauders number 8. This is by Gary Dugan, art by Stefano Caselli. This is the comic that I can't stop reading, but I have the most problems with. Of all of the X-Men spinoffs, I mean, this is everyone's favorite from what I hear on the internet. Everybody that I talk to go, Mike, you don't like the Marauders? And it's like, it's okay. I'm allowed to not like it all the time. But the thing about this issue is it feels that like there are fantastic parts where I'm like, hell yes, this is exactly what I wanted out of a weird offshoot book that's not the main X-Men storyline, where you run into stuff with Sebastian Shaw versus Emma Frost and the weird chess game that they're playing, because it's just beautiful. I mean, the White Queen versus the Black Bishop and all this other stuff, to me it feels like some classic weird 90s X-Men shit, and I think Dugan does that super duper well. The problem is all the stuff with Kate Pryde out on a boat with her team seems so superfluous. It feels so unnecessary to the story, even though I understand that without that bit, there wouldn't be a lot of the intrigue where Kitty Pryde is gone and then she's back and she's trying to work with Bishop and everybody else that's on her team to try to figure out who's going to work on the Red Court and all this stuff it's required. It just feels so unnecessary because I feel like the characterization of a lot of the characters in this book aren't that good. I've talked about it many, many times before. This book is constantly driving me to and from X-Men all the time, so I'm never moving. It's always a stalemate. There's a chess pun for you. All I'm saying is that like I love this book. It sometimes just doesn't need some of the action sequences. Really, this is a book about the massive chess game, the 4D chess game that Emma and Sebastian Shaw are playing against each other, and I just want more of that. I'm torn, but I cannot stop reading, so that's my pick for this week because it's the most controversial book, I think, on my pick as far as what I'm reading.
I'll be honest, I misheard you and thought you said chest game.
Oh,
yeah,
that's different.
For an Emma Frost comic,
listen, Sebastian Shaw,
course.
Emma Frost, chest game. I mean, like, there's something there. I think. I feel like X-Men Twitter is getting really horny, like off in the distance, and doesn't know why.
X-Men Twitter has always been horny.
It's true.
That's true. Well, cool. Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Dominic and Marc about why they're actually on the show, not just to yammer on about comic books. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to talk about them. For our show this week, we are here to talk with Dominic Archer and Marc Casili. We talked to them a little bit in the first half about comic books and stuff, but now we're actually here to talk about a Boxer, a comic that they have right now up on Kickstarter. I guess, Dominic, let me ask you, how did a Boxer come to be? What made this comic a thing that you wanted to put together with fantastic people like Marc and the rest of the group? And could you tell us a little bit about who else is working on this book?
Yeah, absolutely. I first thought of the book at the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, while I was living in China. And living in China was super isolating. It was I was in just outside of a really big city, but it was me and a lot of Chinese people. We don't share the same language a lot of the time. Like, the only people I could talk to are my students, and that's not really, good people to hang out with. So I was listening to lots of podcasts and just kind of revisiting stuff that I enjoyed to kind of pass the time. And while I was there, 3 of my students came up to me to say that they were gay and that they didn't really know how to talk to their family about it, that they were scared to talk to their family about it. Because China is a very family-orientated culture, much more so than the UK, at least. But it's a strong family unit. It's very strange for you to be born in one city with your family and then just leave them forever, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas in the UK, I can go without 2 or 3 years without seeing my mum, and she's mad. But it's not that strange, right? Like, as Marc was saying, it was like Marc could go to the States and to Amsterdam and to Scotland, but it's much more difficult to do that if you're from a Chinese culture because it's more family orientated. So to come out to your family and say I'm gay, which means, at least in China, I'm not going to be able to get married and I'm not going to be able to have kids. That's a really daunting thing to have to deal with. And there was a UN study that found only 15% of Chinese people will come out to their close relatives and friends, which is crazy. So when these 3 students said to me, like, teacher, I'm gay and I don't know how to tell my family, it's like an incredible amount of trust and that they are putting in their relationship with you. So that was something that I was thinking about while I was watching movies and listening to podcasts and stuff. And I hit upon this boxing themed podcast called Finding Drago, it's a very silly, very fun podcast. But from there, it kind of mixed with these questions about the students' identity, about my identity, like what the hell's going on with me, and all of this stuff just kind of collided into a book. And Marc and Gary, who's our penciler, we've been doing comics together for like 4 years, Marc. Jesus Christ. But yeah, I know, we're so old. But when we have a Slack social media channel together, and so what I will do is, like, if I have an idea, I'll just go, what about this? And if the response is more than then I'm probably onto something good, right? So when I pitched the Boxer and Marc was like, yeah, actually that's interesting. That's a good hint that we're working towards something interesting, I think.
Gotcha. And I guess maybe for those who haven't clicked on the Kickstarter link in the show description, could you tell us, give us a high level pitch of the Boxer, or of a Boxer, and essentially, so you gathered this team together, and then you got a very fantastic letterer for this book. What made you guys finally say, all right, we're going to put this out online?
Yes. So a Boxer is about a gay fighter who is struggling between his sexuality and the hyper-masculine world of combat sports, basically. Mm-hmm. We follow him from being an amateur Olympic athlete through to his professional career, and it's him with his partner, his boyfriend, who is also his medical assistant, and the different worlds that they have to traverse and how who they are impacts their profession and vice versa. When it came to putting a team together, which makes it sound like the A-Team,
it is. Comic books, that's how we should think of comics.
It kind of is, yeah. As Marc already shotguns being called the wild card member of the team. Because,
yes, please.
Yeah, he's the wild card. Yeah, why? Yeah. So Gary and Marc, I've worked together since we did the master's degree. They're like, my go-to, just incredible artists. Like, the art is incredible, the professionalism is incredible, and also having someone you trust with feedback is, for me, remarkably important, because I hate being told that I'm wrong, and I hate being told that what I'm doing is bad. So having people that you can trust to push you a little bit is really important. So Gary and Marc are just always like that's a box ticked for me. Mm-hmm. For our colorist, we have Amanda Miranda, who is Marc, you're better off talking about Amanda than I am, I think.
Sure, yeah. Amanda, she's a comics artist from here, from Brazil. She lives not too far from where I live. And I met her at various events that we did here. And she's a really, really, really terrific artist and writer as well. And I always liked her style. And in the past, we did something together, Dom, Gary, and I, and we asked her to color one of the stories that we did together, and we really liked the result. So Dom already had her in mind for a boxer when it was time to do it. She's becoming more and more prominent in the scene here. She's won some awards here in Brazil for her comics. 2019 was a great year for her because she put out 2 comics, and both of them were a step above from what she was doing before, which was already very good. So yeah, I think I'm hoping her stuff will be translated and published somewhere in English in the near future, because it really deserves to find a broader audience.
Awesome, very awesome. And so you guys also have, I'm going to butcher his name because I butcher his name every single time I speak it. You have a Haas. I'm going to say his name is Haas because that's how he announces himself on his YouTube channel. But how did you guys come across Haas? I mean, he works on Panel X Panel, all sorts of stuff. I mean, the dude is prolific right now. I feel like he's exploded over the last year, and you nabbed him for this book to do lettering.
Yes, that was the real coup in the situation, really. So it's Hassan Otman Elhal is his full name.
Thank you.
He's incredible. Is the only way to do it, really. It was one of those situations where I was looking for a letterer for the book. So I initially was reaching out to other LGBT creators, like are you available, or do you know someone who is available? And everyone I messaged was like, oh, I'm not going to be available until next year, but you should check out Hassan because his work is great. And I was like, oh, yeah, maybe I'll just keep messaging around because I didn't know who he was at the time. And then after like the 10th person said to me, you should really message Haas. I was like, well, fine. Like, okay, okay. So I checked out his bibliography, and it was like, oh, I've read that and it's great. Oh, I've read that one too, and that one, and I've read all of these and they're all amazing. And then it was like, oh yeah, he's been nominated for an Eisner Award, and he has this YouTube channel where he breaks down comics. And as Marc was saying earlier on, we have master's degrees in comics and graphic novels, right? So like when it comes to comics, like to making comics, we're pretty nerdy about it. And then I watch Strip Panel Naked, which is his YouTube channel, and I watch it and I'm just like, oh my god, what am I doing? And it's really, really amazing because everyone I work with on the team, whether it's Gary or Marc or Amanda or Haas, they're all so good. They're all so talented at what it is that they're doing that it pushes me to be better. Because if I'm writing the book and everybody else is better on the book than I am, then it's kind of I can't be the one that lets the team down, right? So it's really inspiring to be working with like a team that's so good because I've got to really pull all the stops out.
Gotcha. Paul, Brian, I've been talking nonstop. Do you guys have any questions for this pair?
To maybe pick up on that last point you were making about the team effort. As someone who just reads comics, has never attempted to make one, that the magical relationship that happens between the creative team has always been mysterious to me. So I'm kind of curious, what's the sort of nut and bolts, how the bread is made for your working relationship, the division of labor, and how you come together to make the finished product there?
Yeah, it depends on how we're putting the pages together, because I'm like part of the job as being the writer is also project manager, right? So making sure everyone knows what they're doing, making sure everyone's paid as well, like other unimportant things like that. But
unimportant,
sure.
Yeah,
like they don't really need it. No, but when it when it comes,
I'm calling
down
Gary
to
right now.
Oh no, don't do it. Gary is the worst. No. So when it comes to working with Gary and Marc, we talk to each other about comics all the time. We're always sharing what we're working on. So when it comes to a project that we're doing together, it's very much a case of, this is what I'm thinking, how do you visualize this? And then this is my original draft. Do you guys have any changes? And then Marc will come in with the inks and be like, these are the inks. Are there anything that you guys would want to change? So the initial how all the pages are structured and being set out like that is very collaborative between the three of us.
Right.
Then when it goes to Amanda, it's really down to kind of Marc and Amanda as to how they are communicating as well, because they live close to each other and they know each other. I've never met Amanda, so these guys have a good working relationship that me and Amanda can talk a little bit, but then when we have all of that, I'm the only one that talks to Hass at the moment. So like when we're actually making the full graphic novel, one of the things that I really want to do is to streamline that a lot, so that not so that I can be lazy about it, but so that everyone can see where the book is going. And then Amanda, for example, can start working on ideas for colors like a long time before she gets the pages in front of her, outside of the script. Because otherwise everyone's just working off the script and then waiting for pages to come in. But like one of the things that Gary's quite liberal with adapting my scripts, because he knows exactly what he wants to do. So, and that's fine, because again, we have I trust Gary and I trust what he's doing with it. So yes, trying to form some kind of symbiotic creative team is difficult when, Gary's in Scotland, Hass is in England, I'm in Moscow, and Marc and Amanda are in Brazil. But that's kind of the fun of it as well, is watching like how this thing is evolving, and how like the colors are the perfect example I keep coming back to. I had some bits in the script for how I wanted the colors to look, and the artistic inspirations were kind of were from George Bellows, who's this early 20th century American realist artist. And so that I wanted to kind of capture some of that. But then Amanda just took that and went way beyond what I wanted it to look like in my head. And when the pages came in front of me, it was like, oh yeah, how did she know? So,
right. Yeah.
So there is a thing about working together, but also each person is bringing something unique and amazing to the team, and I don't want to cut that off.
Right.
Gotcha. So Marc, I'm to completely kind of shift directions. I'm curious to know how this work, like for a boxer, is different than maybe some of the like solo comics that you've done. Like, did you take a different approach for how you're penciling and inking things, how you're inking things compared to when you're doing your own work? Are you just going straight to inks, or do you do pencils and inks and so on and so forth?
That's a good question. I like to think about each project as its own thing. I do have my own tendencies that you kind of develop when you work for a long time, but I try to go for references that I think will work with each different project. So in my own work that I write myself and draw myself, I usually go for something more Daniel Klaus, Adrian Tomine, and now I'm bringing some Mazzucchelli influences as well, because I'm changing the tone of my work a little bit. And I did this other comic that used to do with a friend of that I went for old comics as reference. So I would color that one as well. So I would use like an old time, like 80s X-Men color palette for that. And for this one, it's I looked a lot at boxing films, mostly Raging Bull, which is probably my favorite.
Yeah.
And I talked to Gary a lot too, because we're working together on this, and we have a good relationship. That he is penciling this more loosely than he usually does, going for broad strokes and really trying to capture the movement of the boxing matches.
Gotcha.
So each project is a little bit different.
Gotcha. Yeah, I wasn't sure. Like, I don't know enough about inking to speak to it. I mean, like, I think we said we're all kind of comic book readers, less comic book makers. But so we always find a lot of this stuff really interesting. I guess for this project, are you guys using like traditional, like actual pencils and inks and stuff, or is it all digital? Are you shipping like big 11 by 17 sheets of paper to each other across the world?
I mean. Yeah. You kind of joke, but it's not really that far off,
right? Okay.
Because I have downstairs in Moscow, I have Gary's original pencils for this.
Oh wow!
So I was living in China when I was writing the script. Then I went back to the UK and saw Gary, and Gary was like, "Here's the pencils." So I took them with me. But because I'm greedy, but when you guys are working together, Mark, like Gary does the pencils traditionally, then he'll scan the pencils, and then you'll take them and print them out, and then ink traditionally on top, right? Something like that?
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah, I don't work digitally, actually. I only ink traditionally first because I like it best, and second because I don't really do very well with digital inking. So that's all traditional.
Very cool. Yeah, I was like, I realized as I got halfway through that question, I was like, they live so far away. How could this even work? I never considered the idea of printing out pencils. That's a really interesting thing. So you've got a really high res printer down there or something that you're using, right?
Well, I don't personally, but there's a print shop nearby that I use.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a very in-demand print shop whenever we're working. And then suddenly, I reckon they must know. These guys must know when they're like, oh, God, that Dominic guy's doing something again. Because Mark suddenly is walking away with giant...
Yeah, they do. And sometimes I'll go back and be like, I'm sorry, but you haven't scanned this page quite the way I need it. So they have to redo it.
I see.
I feel terrible, but I have to do it, so...
That's really cool. I mean, but this must be, you said there's kind of a growing scene, or there's a pretty big scene, not growing, but in Brazil. Could you tell us a little bit about what that's like? I don't know things because I'm an uncultured American swine, but could you tell us a little bit about what the Brazilian comic scene is like?
Sure. Well, we're a pretty big country, potentially a large market. A lot of people don't have the money to afford comics and movies and things like that.
Okay.
That has changed a bit in the past 20 years. And as a result, I think the market for comics and films has been expanding. And in the last 5 to 10 years, some really interesting independent authors have started to pop up. And some of them start working abroad as well. Like you have Rafael Grampa, who just did something, with Frank Miller, and you have Fabio Moon and Gabriel Ba, and those guys, they're from a previous generation, but you have some newcomers who are doing some quite excellent stuff, and then you have some small publishing companies. I actually own a small publishing company with a friend of mine, and we publish my comics and comes from some other people as well, which is
cool.
Pretty cool. Yeah, like we do like some limited runs, about like 500 copies each time. But yeah, it's cool, and like we've been reaching people and expanding to the rest of the country, and now you're having like bigger and bigger events. We have actually our Comic Con, which is licensed from the San Diego Comic Con. It's now it's bigger in attendance than the San Diego one, which is insane.
Whoa.
That's
Because they started doing it like 5 years ago, and it's just so massive already.
So what you're saying is that the next big comic convention that this podcast goes to is down in Brazil? Is that what I'm hearing?
You should totally come.
Oh yeah.
We should all learn Portuguese and come to Brazil is what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Yes. You can stay over at my place.
Okay.
Gonna have to increase some Patreon levels if we're gonna be flying internationally.
Oh, that's really cool, man. I mean, I'd love to check some of those out. If you guys have any translated comics, or I mean, maybe you can push me even harder to learn Spanish or Portuguese. I'd love to check some of that stuff out. If you have some links, we should. I'll make sure to throw some of those in the show notes.
Sure, definitely. I'll put together some recommendations for sure.
Awesome.
Brian or Paul, I'll let you guys jump in again.
Yeah, I guess my big question, and this goes back to me having no idea what anybody does on a comic book, but looking at the sample pages on the Kickstarter, how much of the black background work is you as the inker, Mark, versus the colorist?
All the black was done by me, and then she distresses it and adds color as needed. But if you look at the ink pages, I inked the whole thing. It takes a while, but it pays off.
I was going to say, that's got to be a lot of work.
Yeah,
it's definitely an impressive look.
Actually, like there's a funny story about that, because when I was in Scotland, I was doing my own comics and my own pages, and I wasn't actually filling in the blacks. I was just leaving them and like indicating them with X's and whatnot, and then filling that out digitally. And then I was talking about that, saying, "Oh yeah, like it's nicer when you actually do it traditionally, but it's just so much quicker this way. So I don't know what to do." And then Gary told me, "Yeah, now that you do it digitally, you'll never go back to doing it traditionally." And I was like, "Oh, really?"
You know what? That story is the perfect encapsulation of their relationship, right? That is the most Gary thing I've ever heard, and the most Mark reaction to it. Just
that is quite right.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's so cool. Well, I guess we're kind of running short on time here. I guess we're running out of digital tape. Paul, Brian, was there any final questions you guys wanted to get out of here before we wrap up?
One. Hopefully, you can have a short answer to this, but I'm very curious. I know that sports comics aren't that well known here in America. They're not that popular. I'm curious if there's any books you read that were sports comics that where you took inspiration from, or kind of like shaped your way of doing this story.
Yeah, some of the big ones were actually looking at other LGBT sports comics, because that's really where through the LGBT, it's not a genre. I'm not entirely sure how to describe it, but it's an LGBT wave of creators and content. It's allowing comics to kind of go in other directions that they wouldn't necessarily be able to. And I think sports comics is a great example of that, because it is a genre that most people aren't really interested in. And then you go, aha, but they're gay. And people are like, okay. And sports comics is an interesting one. I think a good example is Fence. Yes, and Fence and Check Please are two great examples of that. Check Please was like the biggest Kickstarter comic ever. It got like something crazy, like $90,000 or something just incredible.
I think it's like close to almost like $500,000 or something. It's insane.
Yeah. When I say 90,000, maybe I'm thinking of 900,000.
Maybe, yeah.
I thought that can't be right, but maybe it is. But because they are reaching out to this audience, like the audience is interested in books that they wouldn't otherwise be interested in, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
It's not that they're a sports book; it's that people are seeing themselves in the books. And one of the things I found really interesting about Check Please and Fence especially, was how it normalizes the sense of the LGBT relationship within the books. So it's not like, oh, it's really difficult being a gay fencer. It's like we're all open with our sexuality and the relationships are going to take place. There's no judging or anything like that. It's just like, this is the world. These are the characters, and they either love each other or they don't. And that was something I found really interesting, because I kind of wanted to take a direct contrast to that, not in a way that books, there are a lot of very, very well written and made movies and books about the struggles of the LGBT community. So it's not like a boxer isn't saying, oh, it's really difficult to be gay in 2020, but it's more about the personal journey of a character who is caught between the sport and the ideal world, which would be like Fence, right? If the world was like Fence, that would be perfect for him, but it's not. His life isn't like these books, and that's kind of where I was coming at it from, was looking at the world that Fence and Check Please capture, which is like the ideal future, and kind of going, we're not there yet.
Interesting.
Gotcha. Well, cool. I mean, this has been fascinating stuff, guys. I look forward to. You can check out the Boxer on Kickstarter. It's up and running. I think as this episode airs, there's going to be at least a week or so left. So make sure you go and back it. It looks fantastic. Mark, Dominic, this has been a fantastic conversation. I love saying fantastic. It's just my go-to word. So thank you guys so much for being on the show. If folks want to find you on the internet, where can they check you out outside of the Kickstarter?
Yeah, Mark, you go first. You're much more online than I am.
Sure. I have a website which is under some reconstruction, but it's marccasili.net, and I'm also on Instagram. It's comics by KZ, the letter K and letter Z.
And my website is dominicarchercomics.com. I'm on Twitter @comicsarcher, and then on Instagram I am Dom Archer Comics.
Very cool. Well, you can follow the rest of us on the show on the internet as well. You can follow Paul at Oh Hi Paulie. You can follow Brian at Brian Head, and you can follow me at Mike Rappin, and the show at IRCB Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, where I try to post very often, or at least as much as I can.
And this show is powered by fans like you on Patreon. We thank all of our Patreon supporters. If you want to upgrade your subscription or your patronage, or you want to sign up for it, go to patreon.com/IRCB podcast. If you join, you have access to exclusive audio, articles, previews of our upcoming schedule, top of our pile posts, and much more.
We also have our Goodreads group, which is a lovely community of comic friends. You can join our yearly reading challenge, or comment on our weekly threads. I know I'm reading a Headlopper for the reading challenge right now, and it's a good book I would not have picked up otherwise. You can check that out at ircbpodcast.com/goodreads.
And while you're over at ircbpodcast.com, you can find our pronunciation guide, our Discord server, links to our zines, merchandise, and everything else you want related to I Read Comic Books.
And if you haven't already, and I don't know why you wouldn't have, please go ahead and rate and review our show. Give us 5 stars on iTunes and beyond, and we'll make sure to read your review on our next episode.
If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, recipes, reading recommendations, you can send them to us at ircbpodcast@gmail.com.
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all the music for our show. We can't thank them enough. Go make sure you listen to their newest album. It is superb. Chef Kissy Fingers. It's that good. Xander is a high wizard. He's a great high fiver. He's a fantastic dungeon master, and he edits the show. He's a fantastic person. I want to say thank you to Mark and Dominic for being on the show this week. Thank you to Brian and Paul, as always. All you wonderful people out on the internet who chat with us and send us tweets and random things and DMs. We appreciate that as well. So thank you so much for that. And until next time, comics are good, and so are you.